Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Yoga Science podcast and YouTube channel. I'm really excited to have Dr. Amy Wheeler here today. She is the president of the directors for the International Association of Yoga Therapy. And she's been doing yoga therapy teacher trainings. She traveled to India, and she's also a professor of the University for Kinesiology. And thank you so much for being on with us today.
Thank you. That was a mouthful. Congratulations getting through, all those crazy titles, which really don't mean anything at all, right? Just person to person.
Right. I'm trying to get all the, everything in here. So it's really amazing to have you on today. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm excited to talk to you.
Thanks. I would love to hear your story. And you've been doing this for 20 plus years, and how everything ties in together in terms of the difference between like just yoga and any type of other therapy mixing with yoga, like for example, physical therapy or occupational therapy, with just regular yoga certification versus yoga therapy.
That's such a great question. So I'll back up a little bit and kind of tell you how I got interested in it. I was a college athlete, a track and field athlete, and I did heptathlon, which is high jump, long jump, shot put, hurdles, 800 meters, 200 meters, and javelin. So coming out of college, when I discovered yoga, the first class I took, I came to it with a very athletic, fitness-oriented idea of what yoga should be. I did vinyasa flow, I did a lot of Iyengar, and I really just thought of it as my physical body, that this is, one more step in making me strong and having good balance and being lean and all of these great things. So when I went to some of my first classes and, did this really hard workout, I always wanted to leave before the end. I wanted to skip the final relaxation or shavasana because I thought that's just a waste of time. Who's going to lay around like that? And it's so boring and it's so slow. And so that's kind of the mindset that I came to yoga with. So I want to say that now that was back in like the late 1990s. And so what happened was after a few, maybe a year of doing that kind of yoga, I thought, well, I want to go to India and I want to, study with the masters. And as it turns out, Krishnamacharya was the teacher of Iyengar and Patabi Joyce. And so I thought, well, I'm going to go to, their teacher and see what I can learn. And I got there and they were not doing hard yoga. They were doing gentle yoga. They were doing a ton of breath-based movement, lots of pranayama, lots of meditation, chanting. They were teaching philosophy of the Bhagavad Gita and the, Yoga Sutra. And I was there, after 3 days, I was like, oh, I am hooked. This is, my Ph.D. is in psychology. So it was like this perfect merging of the body and the mind. And they were teaching yoga therapy. And up until that point, I had never heard of yoga therapy, even though it had been, around in India. I think in the US, it was a very, premature. We in the US hadn't, in the early 2000s, we hadn't even thought much about yoga therapy. So I stayed for about a month. And since then I've gone back, 7 times and studied yoga therapy and throughout the years, now I have my own yoga therapy school, and I'm the president of the International Association of Yoga Therapists. And it's a new and emerging field. It's a field that a lot of people don't know about and don't yet understand what exactly it is. So I'm really glad that you're having me on here to talk about exactly what is it. And you told me earlier that you're an occupational therapist. And so, what's the difference between an occupational therapist and a yoga therapist, or a physical therapist and a yoga therapist? So do you want me to just jump right into that?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for sharing your experience and your story of how you got here. And so like in terms of, because I do yoga with my students too, and I apply what I've learned. Of course, the scope of practice would be different from an occupational therapist and a yoga therapist, but in terms of some of the specifics of what a yoga therapist can do versus other type of professions. Doesn't even have to be therapists. It could be like nurses or anybody in any field that incorporate yoga into their practice or for themselves.
Yeah. So I think it's really important to know that we as yoga therapists do have a very specific scope of practice. We have guidelines around touch, how we can touch, how we can't touch. We have a code of ethics that basically lays out, just like any other profession, what we can and can't do, and what will happen if we break those guidelines. And we have an ethics board that oversees any problem areas. So I'm really proud of that, because I was one of the people who really worked hard to instill that is necessary to become a profession, that we cannot just have the Wild West in yoga therapy, that it actually needs to have a scope of practice, a code of ethics, an ethics board, and all of this. So for the last 6 years, that's what I've been working on, is really making sure all those things are very tight, because, ideally we want to merge into healthcare, and they're going to want to see that we have all of these things. So the next big thing that we're working on is a national exam to basically say anyone who graduates from an accredited yoga therapy school, which takes about 3 years in most cases, that they actually can pass this national exam or even international exam, and they are qualified to be doing yoga therapy. So I just kind of wanted to lay that foundation first, because I think it's important to see how different it is than maybe being a yoga teacher, where you teach some group yoga classes every week. The thing that really makes yoga therapy quite different than just a regular yoga teacher, and I'm also a regular yoga teacher, so this is not to put down any yoga teachers. It's just saying that we have a slightly different skill set than yoga teachers. And so in yoga therapy, we basically assess the person on what we call the Panchamaya model, the 5 layers of the human system. We look at them physically. We look at their physiology and how is their sleep, how is their digestion, those types of things. We look at their mental states, anxiety, depression, trauma, or not. We look at their personality and how they're getting along in their relationships, and what's working for them, what communication styles are working or not working. The perceptions that they have of their life and their loved ones and their work. And then the last one would be spiritual. Are they feeling connected to something greater than themselves? Are they not? Are they maybe an atheist and don't really want to use their yoga therapy to go in that direction? That's fine too. So, when we look at these 5 layers, we are assessing them quite differently than like a occupational therapist or a physical therapist, where, for the physical body, an occupational therapist or a PT, they might test muscle imbalances, and they might, they're getting very, very specific into different muscles and which ones are firing and which ones are not firing. And they have a lot of diagnostic tests. We actually don't do it that way. We feel that if someone has that much problem in their body, we need to refer to a PT or an OT. We're looking more at postural muscles. We're looking more at, how are you living your lifestyle, in terms of, are you sitting too much? Do you need to get up and walk, 10 minutes several times a day? I would say it's a much more general view of the human body. And then some of us are qualified to look at the human body from an Ayurvedic perspective. And, that has to do with like the birth dosha, Pitta, Vata, Kapha, and, kind of looking from a very Indian point of view, what's going on in the body? What color is their skin? Is it really red? Basically Ayurveda. So it's quite different than you might see with a PT or an OT. And we do a lot of referrals, and we do a lot of working with them. So a lot of times my clients will go to say a PT because their glutes aren't firing, but they'll come to me to help them balance their autonomic nervous system, because the stress response in their body is so strong, and they're stuck in their sympathetic nervous system, that even when they get their glutes to fire, their nervous system has their whole body contracted. So while the PT might work with the glutes, I'm going to work with breath work and meditation and things, yoga nidra, things that are going to bring the autonomic nervous system back into balance, so that they're not stuck in their sympathetic nervous system. So I always say I'm a yoga therapist, and helping people to balance their autonomic nervous system is my superpower. When we kind of start to get into the mental emotional aspects of yoga therapy, again, we're not like a psychologist. We're not doing talk therapy. We're not trying to create solutions for them. We're an active listener, an empathetic listener, kind of like a good friend would be if you were out for a walk with a good friend and they wanted to tell you about their problems. But then the thing that we do is a little different, is we help them look at their life through the lens of the teachings of yoga, which is, like I said, could be the Bhagavad Gita, could be the Yoga Sutras, Hatha Yoga Pradipika. There's many, many different ancient yoga texts that, will help them look at, okay, here's what the 9 obstacles in Yoga Sutra says. Which one of these obstacles is really, up for you today? Or we might say, here are the 5 principles of self-discipline, and how do you take care of your body? We call those the niyamas. Which ones are going well, which ones are not going well, and how can we create some lifestyle medicine changes to help you work on the ones that maybe aren't going so well? So all of the mental, emotional, personality type stuff we do is looking at it through the lens of the ancient yogic teachings, really, and not modern psychology. And again, most of my clients, if they have severe trauma, complex trauma, I require that they're also seeing a psychologist at the same time. I feel like my skill set is actually quite different than a psychologist or a PT or an OT. And we do a lot of cross referrals between us. So I don't know if that answers your question, or if you have follow-ups or.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much. That explains a lot. And in terms of, you mentioned Ayurveda, and so for people to be qualified to get into the program for yoga therapy, they will require, I think, at least 200, I'm just assuming at least 200 hours of like just regular yoga teacher training, right? To get in.
So
And
all accredited schools are required to only let people in that have a 200-hour yoga teacher training or equivalent. So it's always up to the program director. If someone has been doing yoga for 25 years, but they never took a teacher training, well, there's some wiggle room there. But the bottom line is, we kind of expect that when people come into a yoga therapy training, they're kind of know the names of the poses. They're gonna know what some of the different breathing techniques are. But most of us actually do start pretty much from ground one, because we want to build a solid foundation and make sure everyone in the training is on the same page before we build these 800 plus hours on top of it. So for me, even though I do ask that people have a 200-hour or equivalent, because I get a lot of psychologists, a lot of occupational therapists, a lot of physical therapists, some of them don't actually have a teacher training, but the things they do have make them so well qualified. And I know I'm going to start them from the ground up, teaching them yoga therapy and Ayurveda, that, we can make it work for them.
And so to tie in the Ayurvedic part, and you said you're also part of the NAMA, so it's a National Ayurvedic
Medical Association.
Medical Association, and and then they also have an Ayurvedic yoga therapy,
Right.
And so
it's interesting. Ayurvedic. So I was on the committee to help them determine the standards for instead of the International Association of Yoga Therapists certification. There's also a NAMA, or National Ayurvedic Medical Association Yoga Therapist certification. So there's 2 certifications out there. And I would say that in the NAMA systems, they're very much into Ayurveda and even diagnosis from an Ayurvedic perspective. I think that's the biggest difference, is that they're actually diagnosing according to that ancient Indian system, versus in the IYT framework, we want to connect with healthcare. We actually want to be in hospitals and jails and, all sorts of healthcare places. So we don't actually diagnose. We're letting the doctors do the diagnosis, and we do sometimes read those, medical reports. But I would say that we're not diagnosing from an Ayurvedic perspective. We're more helping the person themselves understand what's going on inside of them. So it's a very client-driven model. Like I might say, here's the 9 obstacles to feeling happy, healthy, and whole. Which ones do you think are the biggest barrier in your life? And the client goes through each one and determines which of the 9 really apply to them. And that's quite different than a medical diagnosis from Western allopathic medicine or even Ayurveda, where there's a kind of a hierarchy and there's a person who knows more that's going to tell you what's wrong with you. Do you see the difference? I would say IYT yoga therapy is much more client-centered, and it's about the person discovering for themselves what's happening inside of them. And it's not for me to tell them what's happening inside of them, except to maybe say, hey, I noticed this. What do you think of this? Does that sound right to you? Or no, it doesn't. Okay, well, we won't go in that direction then.
That kind of helped me, and you helped me to basically clarify my next question, is like in terms of for somebody that's deciding which program to go for, do they want to go for just the regular yoga therapy or Ayurvedic yoga therapy, or the master's degree in Ayurveda, or there's bachelor's and the master's and the doctorate, like which one should they choose? And basically you answered that part already.
Yeah, I mean, this is just my opinion. I love Ayurveda. I love Indian medicine. I use it myself. I refer clients to Ayurvedic doctors and Ayurvedic practitioners all the time. But because they have decided to go for licensure and they have their own system of diagnosis, it's going to be more difficult for them to integrate with allopathic medicine. Because what allopathic medicine is going to want from them is double-blind clinical randomized control study, and those research projects are not actually out there enough yet. So while Ayurvedic medicine and Ayurvedic yoga therapy, they've kind of decided to carve their own path as a medical discipline, versus I think the IYT way of doing it is we want to integrate, we want to be bedside, with someone before they go into surgery and teach them how to relax. We want to, basically work within healthcare as opposed to being a separate thing from healthcare.
Interesting. So in terms of the whole, how people say when you want to study for something, you focus on one. So let's just say that I want to focus on Ayurveda, but then when it comes to Ayurveda is so largely, it has a lot of different things. It includes nutrition, the yoga component, and there's Ayurvedic astrology. There's so many different things. So when they ended up, do people just basically focus on one, just on the nutrition, or they do like a combination of different things depending on the person?
For the NAMA system, they require that you're part of your 1,200 hours of yoga therapy training. I think 700 are becoming an Ayurvedic practitioner, like their lower level. They have 3 levels of Ayurvedic certification. So a huge portion of what you learn in Ayurvedic yoga therapy training is actually just Ayurveda. It has nothing to do with yoga, right? Versus I think in the IYT way of looking at it, all 800 hours is pretty much pranayama, meditation, mantra, knowing the ancient teachings from the spiritual texts, all that kind of stuff. So it's not that one is better than the other. It's just really, what do you want your focus to be?
Mm-hmm.
And I can't say, I mean, I personally see Ayurveda as a very integrated system. I don't feel like people would only have to learn about nutrition or only have to learn about this. Because it's based on the 5-element theory, and I think when you learn that 5-element theory, it just weaves through all these different areas. And I'll say that my IAYT yoga therapy training is heavily based on Ayurveda. So I've chosen to make my curriculum kind of a crossbreed of the two. It's somewhere in the middle. You're not a 700-hour Ayurvedic practitioner, but you know a ton of Ayurveda by the time you leave my program.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of the curriculum, so what are some of the classes or requirements that's part of the 800-hour?
So I'm just going to pop this up here. You guys can all find this on the IAYT website, which is www.iayt.org, O-R-G. And these are the educational standards from 2016, which now it's 220, and they are the same. They haven't changed since 2016. But I just kind of want to show you, because I think it's easier to see it. And gosh, there's a lot. So here's the definition of yoga therapy. It's the process of empowering the individual to progress towards health and well-being through the application and teachings and practices of yoga. And what we're adding to that in the near future is that there is an assessment on each individual, and that there's goal setting for each individual, and that there's tracking of progress over time for each individual. So again, that kind of goes back to that idea of we want to fit into Western healthcare if possible, and we know how to take soap notes and all of that. So, but if you get into the heart of it, in section 1, we have the yoga foundations, which is 120 hours minimum. And you can see some of the concepts that they want us to know are Tanmatra, Bhuta, Indriya, Purusha, Prakriti, Panchamaya Kosha, Guna, Dukkha, Drashtar, Drishya, Chitta Vritti, Chitta Parinama, Artha Bhava, Svabhava, Vasana, like all these things. You can see how different this is than OT or PT or psychology. They really want us to understand the different states of mind, the kleshas, dukkha, dharmanasya. So you really do end up knowing the ancient teachings quite well. And then, in this category, framework for health and disease, you're really looking at a lot of Ayurveda, the Tridosha, Triguna, Prakriti, Vikriti, what is Ama, what is Agami, Brahmana, Langhana. And then the biomedical, this is where we really have a nice crossover with Western medicine, that you have to have your, 155 hours of true anatomy and physiology and biomechanics, knowing what are the common drugs, what are the common surgical procedures, medical terminology. There's some psychology in here, knowing what the basic health conditions in the DSM-5 are, looking at the different types of models from psychology, like the developmental stages of life, personality, that type of thing. And then section 3, this is where we have 140 hours minimum of the actual yoga therapy tools and skills, asana, pranayama, meditation, lifestyle modifications, dietary concepts, basically understanding how to work with someone individually, what pranayama would be best for them, what meditation object would be best for them, what mantras would be best for them for whatever suffering that they're feeling. And then the 4th section, which is 205 hours, is a supervised practicum, where you work under the supervision of someone who's been, designated to be your supervisor and has been doing yoga therapy a really long time, and you bring your case studies that you're working with in your clients, and you have the supervisor basically go over all your case studies and say, I don't think this was a good idea, or yeah, that was a great idea, or had you ever thought of having them try this XYZ thing? So there's a very nice practicum. Each student has to work with a client for 150 hours of in-person time, and then there's about 55 hours of mentorship. That can be done online. So like my program, Optimal State Yoga Therapy, we do a lot of the other sections that I mentioned online and in person. But when it comes to your practicum, I ask them to be building their business in their home community. And so all of the practicum hours and supervision are done via Zoom, unless they happen to live in the same town as their supervisor. But so that's about it. And then the last section is professional practice and guidelines. This is the ethical principles, basically just knowing healthcare codes, understanding HIPAA, that type of thing, knowing the regulatory and business issues pertaining to yoga therapy. So like in June, I'm doing a multi-day module just on building your yoga therapy business and figuring out, what's your niche market going to be, and who's your target audience, and what products are you going to bring along with, the actual service of yoga therapy, that type of thing. So that's really the 5 sections that we train people in.
Thank you so much. It really helps because I'm a visual person, and as you're explaining and showing that it's really detailed and very thorough. I love the fact that you also focus on the business part of it. It's because I remember when I was doing my yoga teacher training, they didn't really emphasize too much on the business part. So now I'm like, trying to figure out everything, how to basically monetize and set up everything online for the business.
That's actually one of the reasons I was attracted to you when I saw your Facebook post, because I thought, well, this woman understands that we learn how to do these skills of yoga or nutrition or fitness or whatever we are doing, but that's only half the battle. The other half is, how am I going to monetize this? How am I going to sustain myself in this business so that I can keep working long term? Right? So we actually have the June module that we do, anybody could come to it. It could be fitness people, it could be yoga people, it could be nutrition people, but we're going to take 9 days and really map out every little part of your business, and you're going to have to write budgets. And I mean, it's going to be a pretty serious, intensive kind of entrepreneurial, thing that we're going to do. So I'm very excited about it, because I had to be self-taught with all of that. I didn't know how to do all of that. And through going to community colleges and taking accounting classes and marketing classes and studying with some of the best people around in, entrepreneurial business, you can easily spend $5,000 on a course to learn how to market through social media, So when I look at all the years and the time and the money that I had to spend to figure out how to have a business, I thought, I need to boil that down into like, here's the 9 steps that you need to do, and then repeat, So I'm actually really excited about this business module, because I think it's such a lacking area. And I don't know about you, you don't seem to have this obstacle that I do, but I feel kind of weird in yoga, like putting on my Facebook page, like, hey, we've got this business module coming up. I think it would be really helpful, because I feel like in yoga, we're not supposed to talk about money. But the truth is, if we don't talk about money, we can't sustain ourselves.
Right.
So how do you feel about that? Do you feel awkward sometimes?
Well, yeah, I think so. And especially like sometimes when I approach people, I want to help them. And then it's just big a difference of whether I'm associated with something that I'm telling people that will benefit them. And if it's just like something from a local store or like from Amazon or something that are not things that are not associated with me, they're like, oh yeah, thank you for the referral, great. But then if it's something that has the ties to me, that I earn like some sort of, I will benefit something from it, they'll be like, oh, you're trying to sell me on it, and there's like that kind of resistance sometimes. And also in like Facebook groups, I remember seeing in one of the Facebook groups for yoga teachers, they're saying this whole topic came up and people were commenting and says, oh no, you should do yoga, you should just service, and you shouldn't be really talk about money. But then at the same time, a lot of these yoga teachers basically have groups and everything just solely promoting, pretty much mainly promoting their yoga teacher training programs. And so it's like really, one side versus the other, kind of, it's kind of hard to say.
It is hard. That's a very interesting thought. I never thought of it that way, that we're all promoting something, but if it's a product, someone thinks differently than if it's, oh, it's your training. Of course, you're going to promote that. So that's kind of an interesting thought. And I don't know about you, but the way that I've kind of come home to myself, and I feel comfortable about all of this, is that I truly believe in what I offer, and I've seen it help so many people, and I am of service to people, and other people want to know about that. They want to know what works, what helps. I mean, I'm not just trying to get people to buy random stuff just because, like, oh, I can make $7 off that or whatever. It's truly from my heart that I think it can help. And if we don't market ourselves, people won't know that we're here to help them. So that's kind of how I've come to, peace in my heart with it.
And also Grant Cardone's book, Sell or Be Sold. It's like, even if you're not selling, you say you cannot sell, but you're still selling them or not selling. It's like, it's like the reverse of selling. And I think people, associate the whole money-making thing with how many people you can impact. Like they say, the more money you earn, the more impact you're servicing them. And sometimes when you offer things, of course, provide value, right? But then when you always offer free things and never charge people, then they don't value it as much as if you put a price on it.
That has totally been my experience. I have been the type that is overly generous, overly giving. Anybody with a sob story, I was like, okay, have it for free. Like, to the point where 50% of the people in the room were paying because I felt like, oh, they need this, but they can't afford it. But I'm telling you, 99% of the time, if they don't have any skin in the game and they haven't put some money in or some trade value or something, they don't value it. They don't think it's precious anymore. So I've had actually really not so great experiences with trading and with gifting and with scholarships. I feel like they don't value it then.
Yeah, that's so true. It's like, it's really, I do think that is, as much as the whole, the teaching of yoga and the knowledge of it, it's important in schools to get certified as teaching, yoga or yoga therapy. It also, like, the whole business side of it is important too.
Yeah, and even in the ancient teachings, there were 4 legs on the table, and one of those legs was, how are you going to provide for yourself in a sustainable way? There's artha, there's kama, there's dharma, there's moksha. Like, those 4 legs on the table, even back in thousands of years ago, they knew people needed to eat and have shelter and provide for themselves. There was no secret about that.
And right, and I've also noticed that a lot of yoga teachers are struggling with, they usually end up having another job or doing something else. They don't just do teaching yoga full time. And
and that's hard too, because then you're split between these two things. You're exhausted, you're running all over the place, you're trying to juggle too many balls, and I think that affects the quality of our work.
Right. And also, you said you're doing the curriculum the 9 days. So either you learn it yourself or you end up hiring somebody else. And if you learn it yourself, you're going to have to invest in your education. If you hire somebody else, you're still going to have to pay somebody else to do the work. But then you're pretty much dependent on that person if you don't have any skills yourself. So you still somehow have to learn something on your own and then be able to know what to do just in case you, of course, don't just do everything on your own, but then at least have basic skill of what to do just in case you don't have a backup of somebody else doing it for you.
I'm sure you've experienced this as a woman entrepreneur too, that at first I wasn't making enough money to hire a web designer and to hire a graphic artist and to hire this, like that would cost me more than I was even making, right? So I think in the early stages of our business growth and development, we have to do it all. We have to invest in our business or our business skills and figure out, okay, how can I figure out QuickBooks and how can I figure out social marketing? And okay, I got to change my website. Like you're juggling all these balls, but then as your business starts to grow and you make some money, then you can say, okay, I'm going to give the higher level task to a web designer for $40 an hour. And wow, I don't think I can make these graphics look nice. And I have a little extra money in my kitty over here. So I'm going to hire a graphic designer to do these graphics so that my curriculum looks nice. And you start slowly unloading tasks. And I'm at the point in my business now where I can't do it all anymore because it's grown too much and it's going really well. It's a really great problem to have. And so now I'm trying to figure out, okay, what's my highest priority in terms of hiring people to help me so I can get to the next level and that my time is used most effectively.
That's so true. And yeah, that's really important. There's really a lot, like as even in this any profession, there's so much to consider. And it's important to cover all the areas and of course figure out what you're good at and then delegate the tasks that you're not good at. Like at least explore it first to see if it interests you or not.
You know, I just want to share a few free resources with people because I feel really passionate about this. I don't know if you can tell, but I really want yoga teachers and yoga therapists to make a living. I want them to be able to do what they love all day, every day. So one of the really big things that has helped me is a podcast. Her name is Jenna, Jenna Kutcher, Kutcher. And she basically she says, I'm a small town mama that started off with $300 in a camera, basically shooting weddings. And now this year, through her business and entrepreneurial coaching of people, she earned take home $7.5 million off her podcast. That is crazy. And she is so likable. Her podcast is called The Goal, Goal Digger. It's free. But in her podcast, she says, I'm giving you all this stuff, this business knowledge for free. And trust me, she gives so much business knowledge for free. And you can support me by going to my website and downloading this or that or the other thing for a pretty nominal fee. So I just love that podcast. I listen to it almost every single day.
Yeah, I listened to that one too. I actually found out about the podcast after I bought her course from an ad that I saw on Facebook. So I had the course first and then I discovered the podcast.
And how was the course?
The course is the email building course. She has different labs. She calls them like the email something lab, and there's like a Pinterest lab and an Instagram lab. She does these different little courses for these different social media marketing and then email marketing type of little mini courses, and they're affordable, like $300, $400.
That's the thing. And she's impacting a ton of people and doing a great job. But I just like to tell people what free resources are, because I think as we're solopreneurs and just getting started, I didn't have $5,000 to go spend in some fancy course. You know, I just look around and find who's giving really high quality information for free, mostly on podcasts.
The thing with courses is that there's so many courses out there. One person might teach this system works, and then you end up hearing another person having that system, and that person started off with something else, and you'd be like, oh my gosh, I'm overwhelmed with which one do I focus on first? It's because there's so many out there, and sometimes it's just best to go for like a mentor or a coach. Of course, you'd be able to hire them, and they're, like you said, if they can, then the free resources, podcast, the YouTube, and others. And
I have tried that also. And I found that people a lot of mentors and coaches, business coaches, they don't understand the yoga climate. And so they're taking these weird sales strategies and funnel strategies and plopping it into yoga. And it actually is kind of offensive to yoga people. Like a lot of yoga people don't like that kind of hard sale and that, multi-level marketing. They're like, ooh. So I personally have not had great luck with hiring business people to help with my yoga stuff. I've really had to, I don't know about you, but I've had to figure it out for 25 years on my own. And it, the way that I teach it now is it comes from inside of you. Your values, your beliefs, your life path, your life experiences are going to determine what your niche is, what your mission statement is, what your the products that you choose to develop are. Like, it has to come from the inside out, and then you're just sharing it with people. You're not doing a hard sell.
That's so true. It's really quite different, like you said. Like, what I'm thinking about, a few, I'm not going to mention names, but I'm thinking about in terms of like a few coaches and mentors, the way that they teach is really different than how us yoga teachers and people in the servicing type of business that's related to yoga is quite different approach.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I think there's hope for yoga people. I just think they have to be ready to dive into solopreneurship. I mean, if you're not ready to work hard and just start chopping away at the skills you don't know how to do and figure out how to learn them, it's going to be tough. It's really going to be tough. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to come on your podcast here, is because I saw what you were doing and I'm like, oh, she's getting it done. And other people need to watch you and see how you're doing it and start doing that themselves too.
Honestly, I started with like completely reversed. You know how people are like, oh, you should start with your website, you should start building your list first, and then you should have like at least things to sell, like your program, and get those set up, books and everything done, and then start a podcast. And I totally did it reversed. Like, when I first started the podcast, I pretty much didn't have a list, and I didn't have anything to provide in terms of like, books or programs online. And so I did the podcast first. And then I'm kind of using that to provide content and then to build, like, to do blog posts and kind of just the different way of doing the podcast.
I actually think that is very refreshing. And I think the younger generation really connects to that. That's like the way they go about it. And then probably what happens is you figure out what your audience wants in terms of products. Like, it's almost like you're giving this podcast and doing market research to figure out, oh, here's what they need, which I think is brilliant.
Mm-hmm. And because of this podcast, it made me realize that a lot of these yoga teachers are actually Reiki practitioners too. They kind of do both, and then also tap into other type of energy medicine work in addition to their yoga practice or teaching.
Yep, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. It's like all integrated, right? It's all to do with the mind, body, and the spirit, and the connection with the self and others and everything else.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so many of us interested in this area. We really have to figure out what's my unique offering that's coming through me in a very unique way that nobody else is giving. Mm-hmm. Right? That's really the crux of the issue. And then finding people that are going to connect to the way I like to teach it, instead of just this general, hey, I'm a yoga teacher and a Reiki practitioner. Okay, well, there's about 70,000 of those out there, right? So what's special about you? What's unique about you? Why would someone want to come to you versus another person? That's where the real work is, I think.
Oh yeah, definitely. That's so true. Wow, we covered a lot of different
topics. We did. I'm so happy. I didn't know it was going to go towards this business talk, but I think it was great.
That's great. It's important. I'm glad we talked about it because it's an important area to tap into.
Great. Well, thank you for having me on. It was a pleasure. And I'll continue to track you and watch you and cheer for you and support you.
Yeah. So before we go, just a few more questions, because I usually ask this for almost all the guests that come on here, like in terms of your daily routines. What do you do to help you to prepare your day, like in terms of running as a director, and like all the curriculums that you have to deal with and your own practice and everything else, just to keep yourself.
I only have about 3 minutes because I have a client in 5. But the truth is that if I don't do all my daily routines, I cannot get as much done as I need to get done. So I literally get up and meditate. I do my breath work. A lot of days I'll take a warm bath with oil and do self-massage. I always do a workout in the morning, get on the treadmill, do some weights. I usually save my asana practice, more for later in the day for an afternoon break or before I go to bed. I do yoga nidra almost every single evening as I'm going to bed. I listen to yoga nidra tapes. I have started paying a lot more attention to my food. That's probably an area I really need to work on, because the shopping and chopping and preparing and cooking and cleaning up, I'm not home. I'm not home to do all that. So trying to figure out how to get really healthy, fresh, clean food while out and about has been a little bit of a struggle. So that's really my next frontier, is to try to really master that.
Okay, got it. Thank you so much. I know you have other things to do. So, before we go, just one last thing. Can you just tell us your website and how people can reach you if they're interested in learning more about it?
Great. So my website is www.amywheeler.com, AMYWHEELER.com. And if you're interested in this business course in June, we do it every year in June. It's at a retreat center, beautiful, out in nature for 9 days. And it's called the Professional Business Development Course. So if you go to my website and just look at the offerings, you'll see that course. And we obviously offer the full 800 plus hours accredited yoga therapy training too. And I'd love to talk to you about that or any other program that we're offering.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I'll list those
Thank you
on the description.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you.